Hello, listeners. Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back. In last week's episode, I was joined by defense lawyer Adam Rogers and investigative journalist Paul Palango to discuss the major Canadian news story of the week, which was the sentencing decision related to convicted killer Ibrahim Ali. And tonight, I'm going to continue exploring this topic, but in a different way. If you recall, during the victim impact statements, Ibrahim Ali shocked the courtroom when he plugged his ears for an extended period of time. Well, I think it may have been even worse than the public heard, and tonight we're going to get as close as we can to entering that courtroom and seeing it ourselves. News reporter Kate Walker was there, sitting just a few feet from the 13-year-old victim's family for the entire hearing, and she generously offered to join us here and share her memories of that disturbing day. So let's not waste any time here. In this episode of Nighttime, Kate Walker and I will discuss the trial and sentencing of Ibrahim Ali. So just to start, Kate, tell me a bit about you and your background and your work. Who is Kate Walker?
Yeah, so I'm originally from the East Coast, from Halifax, Nova Scotia. I grew up there. I spent a year in Costa Rica studying while I was in high school. Moved back and then ended up going to Ontario for university and college. So I studied at Western and Fanshawe, did my degree and diploma there in broadcast journalism. So that kind of is where everything started. My background actually started at CTV Atlantic way back in 2014. And then I worked there every summer during university. So that's kind of when I got that new sense that I wanted to be in this industry and kind of fell in love with it. And so I started in radio and then I switched over to TV. So I've sort of bounced around from working in Toronto and then I moved back to the East Coast, started reporting in Moncton, New Brunswick, small bureau there, but so many stories, such a great local community. Filled with stories there. And then I made the move out to the West Coast. So I've been in Vancouver for we're coming on a year now. So yeah, I've kind of been all over Canada, from radio, web, TV, you name it. I've probably done it. Yeah. So yeah, no, this is my passion for sure.
Yeah. When you look at all the things you've done and the occupations you've had along the way to news reporting that you're doing now, I think the common denominator through most of it has been storytelling. What is it about storytelling or news reporting that excites you? Like, why did you choose this?
Yeah, I've actually been asked that question a few times, and I think it's a really good question because I think a lot of times people don't know why they get into this industry and people can get in it for the wrong reasons, or they quickly find out that this is not for me. Mm-hmm. The minute I realized that I wanted to do this and that I kind of fell in love with storytelling was the very first time that I sat down and interviewed somebody. That human connection that you get. I say it all the time. My days are enriched by complete strangers. I've met people from all walks of life that I never would have come across had it not been for a story that I was covering. Gone to neighborhoods that I never would have seen. So the first time that I sat down with somebody and allowed them to express themselves and gave them that platform, and you get those messages later like, thank you so much for sharing my story. Like I wouldn't have been able to tell it otherwise. Mm-hmm. There's such a sense of fulfillment and, you really feel like both people got something out of the experience. So that human connection of storytelling and meeting new people is 100% the reason why I love being in this industry.
Wow, that's awesome. Of all the stories you've told in your career, one of the darker ones certainly relates to the trial of Ibrahim Ali. You reported on the sentencing decision, and my understanding is you arrived to the West Coast after the trial had already occurred and before the sentencing decision. So you would have went into that with all this kind of background or all this background on the case having already occurred before you walked in there. So maybe just to start, give me a sense of what you knew about the Ibrahim Ali case before you took on the assignment to report on the sentencing.
Yeah, so obviously this happened way back in 2017, long before I had even been here. But when I arrived at Vancouver, it quickly became evident that this was a very high profile case. And there were several reporters covering this story. So going into the sentencing involved a large amount of research, knowing exactly how did we get to this point, and sort of the roller coaster that has gone on over the years to even get to this sentencing. Again, we're talking about something that happened in 2017, and the sentence was only handed in 2024. So you can imagine all these years of, things going on. So, just going back to the day in the park, what happened that day, when the publication ban was put in place, because that changes the story completely. The little girl's name was out there, people had been reporting on it, and then the pub ban was put in place, and all of a sudden, media websites were scrubbing those articles. So then you get to the point of what can I and what can I not say? So going in that day, we knew we could not mention her name. We knew that we could only mention so many things, that, he was convicted of first-degree murder, but we know there was also a sexual assault on the side there. So you have to be so careful in what you include in your reporting. So for me, it was just going back and, going over all the details of how did we get here, and, what could be the outcomes of today, because obviously it went in the family's favor as far as, the amount of justice that could have been handed down, but that day could have gone incredibly different.
Heck yeah. So I want to focus on that day and the actual, everything that happened in the courtroom. The first thing I was curious about, where you had attended the sentencing decision in person, I'm just wondering about security in the courtroom. And the reason I ask that is, of course, during the verdict being handed down, there was a suggestion that a gun may have been attempted to be, smuggled in there by a family member of the victim. I'm just curious, did you notice anything unusual or different about security during the sentencing?
So I didn't. And I think that is what is shocking to me, because again, when you have such a high profile case like this, and there were allegations that the victim's father had brought, that's been openly reported on, the allegations of him bringing a gun into the courtroom. Now, he wasn't there in person that day. However, to know that we're covering a case of this magnitude and there are no metal detectors, that sort of thing, seems quite shocking, to be honest. The defense lawyers were also not present in the courtroom that day. Ibrahim Ali himself was only there via video link. So, that could have attributed to why there wasn't a higher sense of security. However, it seems like, something that would be pretty standard for when you're about to sentence somebody to life in prison.
In this case, it's a high-profile trial, a high-profile case. This decision is going to be big news. Give me a sense of the crowd in there. Of course, as you just said, Ibrahim Ali he was there just on video. Some of the defense lawyers weren't there. Who was there? What kind of turnout did this get?
Yeah, so the first thing I noticed was that it was a packed courtroom. I was there well before it started, and I barely got my spot. There's certain areas in the courtroom. So there's the general public, which was completely full. Then there's room for media, that was completely full. And then there's all the way off to the right side is reserved for the family. That was also completely full, which I think spoke volumes, considering the fact that the family is not from here. A lot of them had flown in from as far as China, Toronto. This was such an important day for the family. So the courtroom holds around 150 people. Every single seat in that room was full.
Wow.
So just going into the day, you knew the interest that this case had piqued to everyone, of all levels, whether it was personal or just genuine interest or curiosity from the public.
And for a sentencing decision, my understanding kind of the format of that is, before the judge hands down the sentencing decision, there's a series of victim impact statements that are presented, and generally the accused, or person who's been convicted at this point, will sit and take it all in. But other than the victim impact statements and the actual sentencing decision being handed down, what else would have happened? You go in and, what is a typical sentencing decision hearing like?
Yeah, so you pretty much covered it there. This day was reserved originally for 2 days. They had set aside the Friday, and then I believe it was the Monday. There were 2 days set aside because this could have taken 2 days. It took half the day. I was in there by 9:30, 10 o'clock. We were out of there by 1 o'clock.
Wow.
So it didn't take long for the judge to make up his mind once he read the room and had listened to 7 impact statements. So we go in, it's a full courtroom. They lay the land of, this is a publication ban. The girl's name is to not be named at all. And then we got right into the impact statements. So up on the video link, we've got Ali's defense lawyer. We've got Ali in one room. He's in his full jumpsuit. He's listening on the phone via an interpreter because he does not speak English. So I think that's another really important thing to remember here is everything that is being said, these super emotional testaments are all being translated through the phone. And we find out later as the impact statements go on that he puts down that phone and chooses not to listen. So yes, we listened to 7 impact statements. It started with the brother and his wife. The brother was sitting beside me, and I felt myself naturally, my gaze was drawn to him the entire time because, of course, you're looking to see his reaction, listening to these gruesome details about his little sister. She's only 13 years old, and the judge is reiterating the details and the magnitude of the crime that went down that day. I can't even imagine what it felt like for him to sit there and listen to that. You could actually see the agony in his face, and it did get to a point where he actually left the courtroom for a while. So the victim impact statement that stood out the most was from the father. They originally said, we've got 7. They named some family, they named some friends. Again, the brother and his wife were the only ones that were actually present in the courtroom to give their victim impact statement. And then they said, we're going to hear a video recording from the little girl's father, and it's 47 minutes long. And me and the reporter beside me looked at each other, and our eyes just kind of jumped out of our heads because I have never, in all the court cases that I've covered, listened to a victim impact statement that long before. So just 47 minutes of a video recording. So that kind of just shows the emotional distress that he's been under for all of these years. So he opens up his victim impact statement by acknowledging that English is not his first language. So he apologizes first for saying, sorry if you can't understand, the gravity of what I'm trying to get across here, but I'm going to go ahead anyways. And so he does. And when I tell you he went through every step of that girl's life in those 47 minutes, if any victim impact statement was going to sway the judge, this was the one. So he starts from the moment that he mentions they moved from China because there was the one child rule. They moved to Canada so that they could specifically have a daughter. And so they had this little girl. He talks about the moment that he held her for the first time in the hospital. And this is kind of what got the courtroom, I think, was he had promised her the first time he held her that he was always going to protect her. And then later on in his impact statement, he gets into the fact that he feels like he failed to protect his daughter. And so that was really, really tough to listen to. He got into anecdotes about the fact that she was just like any other child who, asked for McDonald's on the way home or asked for KFC on the way home, but she always shared her first couple of fries with her dad because it was so important to her to be generous. And then he says, one day it got to the point where, she couldn't share her fries with daddy anymore because I failed to protect my daughter. So the guilt that this father felt came across so clear to the courtroom, talking about how he visited the cemetery every day, made sure that the grass was watered properly so that the flowers were still in bloom. He really got into every single detail of this girl's life and just, again, really reiterated just how much he felt like he failed to protect her. And it was really hard to listen to. And that was the point where the brother had actually left the room because, of course, that can't be easy to listen to.
Hell no. And yeah, I wouldn't say famously, but infamously during the victim's father's victim impact statement, Ibrahim Ali is seen, without the phone to his ear, but it goes to the point of actually plugging his ears. Of course, Ibrahim Ali's face is on a screen or whatever in the courtroom, but was it obvious when he did that? Like, did you notice right away?
Everyone's glance went to the screen of Ibrahim Ali plugging his ears. And it was almost a sense of, is this actually happening? Like, is this level of disrespect actually being displayed? And it was, because I was sitting behind the sketch artist who was doing the sketches in the courtroom. And I quickly watched her start to draw him with his fingers plugged in his ear. And a couple of people came up to her and said, that's the money shot.
Yeah.
That tells you everything you need to know. You know, they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. Well, that tells you everything you need to know about how he was displaying his lack of remorse that day. And again, the judge is obviously taking in all of these things when he's trying to make his decision. So yes, during the father's impact statement specifically, again, this went on for 47 minutes. He first puts down the phone. So we know at this point he's stopped listening. And then he starts to pace his cell. And then this is something that I'm not entirely sure of, but I don't know if the recording then became on speakerphone in the cell so that he was forced to listen, because then we do see him put his fingers in his ear as if he's almost being forced to listen. And he sat there for the entire duration of the impact statement with his fingers in his ears. And I watched the sketch artist draw this. And that is actually the sketch that ended up being bought by media that day for, again, the visual purposes, because we cannot show who was in the courtroom. The brother was holding up a photo of his sister the entire time. We cannot show that. We interviewed the brother after the fact. We have to blur his face.
And don't use his name either. Yeah, I've noticed as well. And
we don't use anyone's name that was there that day. There were actually supporters outside of the courthouse holding up signs that had justice for her initials. We couldn't even show that.
Wow.
So you have to be so careful on how you report on a case that is under a publication ban. And I just want to talk about how much that alters reporting.
Yeah, I was really curious about that.
Anytime there is a murder victim, as a reporter, at least myself, you want to be able to give the victim a sense of personality, for a lack of a better word. We don't want to remember the victim as the victim. That person was murdered. We want to be able to say their name. We want to be able to show photos of them. What do they like to do? What were their hobbies? We want to be able to show videos of them, you know, to show their mannerisms. She was just a child. She had so much life ahead of her. And we heard that in the brother's victim impact statement. The minute you take that away and we can't show her face, we can't show photos, we can't show videos, we can't name anybody, it immediately desensitizes the case because we're not feeling that level of emotion that we would have felt if you were watching a news report and you saw this little girl's face. Immediately that changes the story and how you would feel. You know, it's heart-wrenching no matter which way you tell the story. But to take away the visuals of being able to see that little girl and see how she lived her life, it changes the reporting completely.
You know, you talked about your reporting, but in the reporting of others that you've seen in this story, did you notice that missing from it, her personality and what made this such a heinous crime because of the publication ban?
Absolutely. I mean, every single media reporter was lined up for a scrum to talk to the brother after the fact. And, you know, at one point, he even took the photo of her and raised it during his interview so that we could see her face. And we had to reiterate to him, myself and another reporter, we have to blur this anyways. Like, it doesn't matter how much you want to show us who your sister was. Because of this publication ban, her photo is not going to leave this space. And maybe it was important for us to see, because of course I'm telling you so many details that never even made it into my story, because as a news reporter for a 6 o'clock primetime show, you're confined to 2 minutes. Well, how do you sum up a court case that was 5 hours long or 6 hours long into 2 minutes? We're not getting into every single detail of that victim impact statement. That's why I think these conversations in length and discussions are so important, because there are so many details in this case that the general public does not hear about.
Absolutely.
And when you're talking about a case that involved a jury, it's so important to know these things for people to be able to formulate their opinions and their decisions. They need to know how this impacted the family. There was an entire discussion about the mother's health and why she wasn't there that day. She was so mentally and physically ill from what had happened to her daughter that she couldn't even formulate her own victim impact statement. So that just shows you the gravity of this case. But had you not been in the courtroom, you never would have known that, because she just wasn't there. So we can only assume why certain family members weren't there. It wasn't because they don't care. It wasn't because they didn't want to make the trip. There's so many factors to how this has affected their life and their health that they couldn't even bring themselves to be in that room, regardless of the fact that, you know, the suspect himself wasn't even there.
At the moment that Ali plugs his ears, You described like the different journalists recognizing it and, you know, giving the sketch artist a tap on the shoulder, so to speak. But from the public, like there would have been a crowd of the public in the courtroom. Was there like, I can only imagine there'd be like audible gasps of just shock in seeing this. Did you notice a reaction from the public when he stuck his fingers in his ears?
So I was in one of the front rows,
Okay.
so I couldn't really see what was going on behind me. And there is a sense of silence
Yeah.
when you're in that room.
Mhm.
So I think, you know, you could feel the energy in the room change.
Okay.
There was no audible gasp. There were no comments because you do have to be very quiet while these
Yeah.
things are going on. So, but it's one of those things where silence speaks volumes,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
We're listening to these people speak, and then we're also looking up at the screen going, is this man really plugging his ears while this father is laying his heart out to the courtroom right now?
Hmm.
So the gazes of the room were very obvious. There was a lot of eye contact between people. There was a lot of note taking. I could see reporters in
Yes.
front of me immediately typing, Ibrahim has his ears plugged.
Yeah.
Right away, we knew this was how we were going to portray how he was feeling.
Mhm.
Because when he's not in the room, we can't read his body language. He doesn't speak English, so there's not much commentary coming from him. So all we're seeing is a man who had the phone up to his ear, put it down, started pacing in his cell, and then plugged his ears. So, that tells you a lot without saying anything at
Heck yeah.
all.
But in this case, the thanks he gets for the disrespect is he gets the harshest punishment available by Canadian law, which is life in prison without a chance of parole for 25 years. When that sentence is handed down to him, what was the reaction like there? I don't know if this was a surprise to people because I'm sure it's the outcome and the sentence most people would have expected or wanted. But was there anything you can say about the moment that the actual sentence is delivered?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just backtrack for a second. Before the sentence was handed down,
Mhm.
the judge looked at him, via video link and said, now, before I sentence you, and in this moment, even the delivery from the judge, we all knew what was coming.
Mhm.
We had just sat here and watched this man plug his ears, put down the phone. It was almost as if he wasn't even there. He wasn't trying to be there that day. He wasn't trying to listen to anything. He wasn't remorseful. This was all so obvious. So the judge says, before I hand this sentence down, is there anything you want to say? And he picks up the phone and, immediately he starts speaking a different language. And his interpreter is translating, saying, I didn't do this. I wasn't in the park that day. I did not kill this girl. You can go back and you can find the tapes and see where I was that day. He is all the way up until the moment he was sentenced. There is this level of delusion that he had zero involvement in this case, as if he, again, hadn't even been there that day. He was so adamant right up until the moment that there was evidence, even though we know through DNA that it was proven that it was him through the semen that was found inside the girl's body. We know it was him. He's already been convicted, and he is still trying to convince the courtroom that this was not him. So after he reiterates a few times, it wasn't me. You can find the evidence through CCTV that I wasn't there. His defense lawyer speaks up and says, I couldn't really hear what Ali was saying, but I'm not sure that's going to change your mind, to the judge. It was as if the defense lawyer has already accepted
Yes,
defeat.
that's like throwing your papers in the air, like, yeah, we're done.
Correct. And then the judge hands down the sentence. He reiterates this is the harshest sentence in Canada, life without parole for 25 years. And in that moment, I immediately looked to my right to look at the brother. And there's just this embrace between him and his wife. Obviously there had been tears leading up to that. I believe the woman that had been sitting with them the entire time was victim services. He had reiterated many times, the help that he's gotten through victim services and how they've helped him throughout the years. And so that woman was there supporting them the entire time. And so a lot of hugs. There were no cheers. There were no gasps. It was almost as if this was the obvious outcome for the day.
Mhm.
Just a lot of hugs and a lot of emotion. It was such a heavy day, and it was only half a day. I will say I've covered more court stories than I can count in my career. And this day was one of those stories you bring home with you at night. I thought about this case when I went home that night. I thought about it when I was going to bed. I thought about it the next morning. And so if this is my consensus leaving this, I can only imagine how the family must feel. But the brother did say he felt like he got justice, which I think is really important.
There is a suggestion of an appeal that's coming. Do you expect to be covering this more in the future? Like, do you see this as a closed book, or do you think there's more coming from Ibrahim Ali?
I don't think this is a closed book. No. I think because of the fact, again, in his final statement, the fact that he reiterated that, he didn't agree with what was being said and he doesn't agree with the trial. And he actually said that he thinks this is all unfair. I anticipate an appeal. And it may be myself, it may be another reporter, it kind of just depends on the days and times that this gets scheduled. But I don't think this is the last we've seen of this case. You would think when somebody gets put away for life that that's the end of it and that's the last we're going to hear. And for the family's sake, you almost hope that is the case, right? The brother felt like he was closing a chapter. And he did mention that he felt like he got some closure that day when he spoke to the media after the fact. He felt like he got justice because it was the highest punishment that could have been served in the country. But he did say that he felt like his parents were never going to feel any kind of closure with this. So the fact that this might not be over, I think is really unfortunate for the family. But I think we haven't finished with this case just yet.
I want to thank you for joining us for this discussion. My goal with this series has always been to highlight stories that I felt were interesting. But I also want to provide a platform for listeners to get involved in the conversations we're having. So if you have any thoughts or opinions on anything we discussed, please go to nighttimepodcast.com/contact and send us a voicemail that we can respond to in the next episode. I look forward to hearing from you. Now I'm going to wrap up this episode, but before I do, let me end with some thanks. First, a big thanks to Kate for sharing an evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. Kate's eloquent way of recapping the many emotional moments in this hearing made the actions of Ibrahim Ali all the more disturbing, and only made me feel stronger in my belief that Canada's harshest punishment was appropriate in this case. And moving on, I'd like to thank LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides my intro and outro voiceovers, and Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this episode. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. And on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the Nighttime Podcast Premium feed. Carly, Emma, and Amy, thank you for going premium. And if anyone else would like to support the show, you can do it in a variety of ways. First of all, the premium feed subscription costs just a couple dollars a month, and that money funds the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a full back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all like-minded friends know why they should listen. Your support in growing this is very much appreciated. And until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.
The only thing that I think kind of stood out to me that I didn't get to include in my report was the final question that was asked to the brother was, is there anything you want to say about this case when it comes to the justice system and reform and what went on during the trial? Because obviously this has been dragged out for so long.
Yeah. Well, she'd be 19
and
at the time of her trial. She was 13 when she was killed. She'd be a 19-year-old sitting there.
Exactly. So in his victim impact statement, he went over the fact that, she would have been a junior in college by now, when he went through all those milestones. But one thing that he highlighted that I think is really important, and you actually brought it up in your previous episode with Paul and Adam, was the defense lawyers and how they spoke about the victim. Mm-hmm. He reiterated how, these were his words, disgraceful, distasteful, and disgusting it was that there ever could have been an allegation that this little girl had consensual sex with Ibrahim Ali. Mm-hmm. And so that was his main takeaway when it came to what could be wrong with the justice system, or from the defense's side, arguments that were made that were, in his opinion, obviously didn't hold any weight whatsoever. To even make those accusations that a 13-year-old could consent to sex is legally not even right. So he really wanted to touch on the fact that, yes, we got the outcome we wanted, but to get here, it has been nothing but torture, listening to lawyers try to make it seem like his little sister, attacking her character is how he felt, that she could have ever consented and asked for this attention.
And I can agree with him. And I think, just to back up to the publication ban, when you have the defense suggesting that maybe she was attracted to him and decided she wanted to have sex with this guy, it makes you think, like, what was going on? Like, what is the story behind the story? But meanwhile, the media is not able to tell the public anything about her. So it would lead someone to wonder, like, is there like drug addiction, and maybe she was like sex trafficking? Like, was it all this stuff happening? But it seems to just be something they pulled out of thin air and just dropped in the courtroom like a disgusting bomb. And there it is.
Yeah, and obviously when you're a defense lawyer, you have a job of defending your client. So that might have been them, grabbing at strings that weren't there. But we know from the footage that this was just a little girl visiting a Tim Hortons that day, walking through the park with her earphones in.
Yeah, and
A complete random attack, and we know that now.
Yep.
And we know through DNA and some of the injuries that were described that this was not consensual sex.
Yeah.
It was sexual assault.
Yeah, and what Paul said in our prior episode is, you have a man who doesn't speak English and a 13-year-old child with headphones in. How do they end up having sex consensually in a park? Which is impossible anyway, legally. But yeah, it's absurd.
It is. And the brother outlines that.